Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. It is the 1st of June. It is the first day of a very busy month, as we covered in detail on our last episode of this podcast. We had Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting insider, on the show Tuesday, breaking down weekend after weekend of key official visits coming to Happy Valley beginning this weekend. Among those visitors are a large group of committed players for the 2024 class, including the quarterback of this class, Ethan Grunkemeyer, who will join us in just a moment on the Lions 24/7 podcast. A little bit later here on the show, you'll hear from my colleagues Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. We've got a football mailbag to get into. Mark Brennan and our photographer, Grace Brennan, were on the road yesterday. Hershey at the Penn State Children's Hospital, where the Nittany Lions players got in there, had a lot of fun. We'll hear about some of that from the Brennans. And additionally, we'll break down what's cooking on the camp circuit that's upcoming. Sunday is a camp here in Happy Valley. It's the first of many for the month of June. We'll be on the field for all of them. We'll give you a little bit of a preview on what to expect from our coverage and from prospects coming to town. But as reference, we're going to begin this show with a member of the 2024 Penn State recruiting class, and the newest one at that, Ethan Grunkemeyer, who recently punched his ticket to the Elite 11 finals out in Los Angeles, and right now on with us at the Lions 24/7 podcast. Ethan, thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, hey, I know we're just about 2 weeks almost removed from your commitment, but a big congratulations to you and your family for getting to this chapter in your football career, in your academic career.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Now that you've had a couple weeks to digest it and kind of soak in the fact that you are an Nittany Lions commit and you've got your future figured out from a college football standpoint, what are you most pleased about with the decision you made back in May?
Yeah, I'm just really excited to be surrounded by great people. Coach Franklin, Coach Yosich, Coach O'Brien. I built a really good relationship with all of those guys. And, I know Drew and that he loves his experience there so far. So, I'm really happy where I landed, and I'm really excited to start to work with those guys.
When you were working your way towards a commitment, it wasn't like you held a scholarship offer for a year and had a long time to balance it and weigh it. That offer came this spring. The commitment came this spring, and all of a sudden your recruitment's closed. Can you talk us through what that process was like? Because it was a pretty short span of time from when you became an official Nittany Lions target to a Nittany Lions pledge.
Yeah, so it's always been my dream to play at that big stage, and Penn State's, one of the biggest stages in the country. So when Coach Yosich came out to watch me throw, and then I got the offer later that day, it was one of the schools that jumped up on top of the list. I've been there a couple of times, so I was familiar with it. I went out to visit, and it just felt like home. And talking with family, I just decided to pull the trigger. It felt like the right time.
When you made that decision, I guess prior to the Penn State offer, perhaps, what was your recruitment look like? I mean, were there some schools that you really had built a connection with, and that you maybe had to pick up the phone and call them and say thanks, but no thanks? Who else was involved in your recruitment legitimately down the stretch?
Yeah, so Cincinnati was in there, Clemson was, Michigan State was in there, Virginia. So there was a quite a few schools. It was really hard to, have those relationships be built and then let them know. But I feel like, it had to be done to make this decision for my future. And I think it was the best decision for my future.
You talked about visiting before the offer, visiting after the offer. What's the dynamic that's maybe different when you show up to town and you have that offer in your pocket and you kind of have a little more validation that you are a targeted prospect versus when you show up to campus and you're still kind of waiting for that domino to fall?
Yeah, as soon as I stepped on campus, even before committed, I just felt like a priority. And then the commitment just really made it feel like I was part of the family now. As soon as we got there, we were greeted by everyone, and they really just made me feel like I was part of the family already.
You mentioned Mike Yursich coming out to Ohio to watch you throw the ball, get a good kind of assessment of you, person to person, face to face. Do you feel pressure when you've got Power 5 offensive coordinators on your home turf and they're there to see you specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little nerve-wracking at first, but you just got to go out there and do your thing. That's what you work hard to be able to do. So, after that first throw, you just kind of get into the groove and start to sling it around a little bit.
What does that day look like when you I guess that Mike is going to be coming to your campus and that you're going to have a chance to impress, and what's the feedback like after? How do you receive it? And then ultimately, how does that materialize? And here's a scholarship offer.
Yeah, so he came out to watch me throw. He needed he had to get on the road afterwards, and he told me to give him a call later that day. I felt like I threw pretty well, threw one of the best I had that spring so far. So I was feeling really good about it. Got on the phone with him, and he just made it feel like I was a priority for them and extended the offer to me. And I was really excited about it. I was stoked, and it was just one of the greatest feelings.
Now, tell me what it's been like since the commitment with Mike Yursich, and as you try to develop that relationship. But I'm sure there's also some challenges he's going to throw your way and try to push you to become as polished of a prospect as you can be before you get in his room and you're officially his pupil. What is the next phase of that relationship?
Yeah, so just keep progressing before I step on campus. We've done some Zooms, been on the phone a ton, trying to learn a little bit what they do before I get there. Just keep working on my craft as well. I work with Coach Brad Mendler. They trust him a lot, so that's a nice part about going to Penn State is working with a guy they really trust. Drew works with them, and I really enjoy working with him. I feel like he's improved my game a ton. Just keep building that relationship with them as well.
You mentioned your work with Coach Mendler. We've heard about him in the past on this podcast from Drew Aller when he was discussing his development at the high school level, going from a three-star prospect when Penn State offered to the number one quarterback in the country by the time he enrolled here. How long have you two kind of known each other? How long have you been in the same circle working with the quarterback trainer? And what exactly was the insight that came from Drew as you sat down to make this decision?
Yeah, so he just let me know if I had any questions to reach out. I've been talking with him a bunch about Penn State before I was committed and after, just kind of getting a feel on what they do and just getting a more inside look on the coaches, interactions with them, and whatnot. I started working with him. I want to say maybe 2 years ago, right before the Penn State commitment was my first time working with him. Worked with him multiple times since then, and in recent times I worked with him this past week, and just kind of figuring out how they do things on campus there and in practice, just trying to learn my best before I get there, so nothing's really a surprise to me.
Now, tell me a little bit about the next phase of this recruitment process, which is maybe they look at bringing in a second quarterback, and that's, I'm sure, something that's been transparent between you and the coaching staff. We saw Drew be part of that two quarterback class with Bo Prabula. It's happened 3 different times under the watchful eye of James Franklin's staff. What are you hearing from Penn State staff? They put out an offer since you committed at the position. So, what's your impression of what the situation is going to look like at this position for 2024?
Yeah, so what I just gotta work hard, and I'm not exactly sure what the future holds, um, but I just want to be a part of this a great class and just do my best to recruit the best guys in there, and that's what I'm gonna do. No matter what happens, and just do my best to bring the best class to Happy Valley.
Now, is that something you would be comfortable with if there was a second quarterback brought into this class?
I think at the end of the day, you're all always competing for the job. Even if you're the named starter, you still have to go out there and compete, whether you're first or fourth string. So I think just going in there to compete my best is really the main goal right now, whether it has 4 quarterbacks in the room or 5.
Now, 2024 class that preceded you as they were building this thing in the winter and in the spring, it's a top 10 group that you joined. There's a lot of impressive playmakers across the board. What stood out to you as you kind of sat down? I'm sure you've watched a lot of highlights by now of your future teammates. What's the big, I guess, impression that you get from this group?
Yeah, the first thing is, how welcoming they were, and as soon as I committed, they added me into the group chat, talking to me, congratulating me, and whatnot. And then second, kind of the guys I'm going to be surrounded by, great people, great players. That the offensive line they recruited so far is top tier, top in the country. So having a chance to be protected by those guys is really exciting.
You've been texting a bunch. It's going to change soon. You'll get a chance to share the practice field at Penn State, not with the Nittany Lions yet, but as prospects at the upcoming camps. You mentioned you'll be here on Sunday. Look forward to seeing you throw the ball again. We got to see you at Elite 11 regionals here in State College a couple of weeks ago. But there'll be a chance to be out there with other commits on the field, off the field. You have official visits coming up in June. A lot of you on campus together. What do you hope to accomplish collectively over the course of this month as you kind of put those faces to names?
Yeah, just build great relationships with them. Those are going to be my future teammates, and I just want to be, really comfortable with them by the time I step on campus, and just hope to continue to bring in a really good class, add some more guys into it, and just keep improving.
I've got to ask about Luke Reynolds because you got a long look at him a couple weeks ago at camp. So did we. Very impressive. A few days later, our 24/7 Sports rankings update popped them into the top 10 overall at the tight end position, the top 100 overall, regardless of position. He is an ascending prospect. He was playing your position for the most part of his high school career. That's going to change. You got to see him in action. You got to throw some balls his way. What stands out about Luke Reynolds here as he prepares for his senior high school season?
Yeah, really his athleticism. I know his numbers pop out when you look at him on paper. He looks really impressive in person, catching the ball, the way he runs routes, gets out of his breaks. And he's even better of a person. Got to meet him the day before the camp on an official visit to Penn State, and he was kind of congratulating me on my commitment and really just welcoming into the family. So great person and great player, all around player, really athletic and excited to throw to him.
Now, he is heading out to Southern California as well. He's one of those rare non-QB participants at the Elite 11. They have the All-22 supplemental piece of the camp this year. That's new. It's great to see those position prospects involved. But for you, you're going to be out there shoulder to shoulder with 19 other quarterbacks who are considered, top of the class in the 2024 cycle at your position. Guys who are eventual NFL draft picks, eventual big-time college quarterback like you want to become. What are you most looking forward to for an event that gets underway out in Los Angeles, specifically the Redondo Beach High School, June 14th?
Yeah, really competing with those guys, learning a ton from the great staff they have out there and showing what I can do. I'm really excited to go out there and, see how the other guys look and see how I stack up against them.
Now, what has Drew given you any kind of insider advice? I mean, he's gone through the Elite 11 process. He was part of that finals group, one of the top performers out there a couple summers ago. Any feedback from him on what to expect?
Yeah, he's been super helpful, with the playbook. They sent us out a playbook to, kind of learn and get familiar with before we get out there. I've had a couple questions about it. I shot his way. Just, his dad has actually been really helpful with it as well. My mom, has been talking to him with it, when we throw. That family has just been super helpful with not only the recruiting process, but the Elite 11 one as well.
You mentioned a playbook, and people are probably like, wait, what? Because they think maybe you just go out there, you get handed a football, and they say, throw the football well, and then we'll rank you based on that. There is so much that goes into this event. I know I've covered it where they had a guy, here's a pen, here's the big board, draw us up the scheme, and it can be embarrassing if you're not prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are they sending your way 2 weeks in advance of this? Because I think it'd be great for our listeners to hear this. It's not about raw skills. It's not just about the passing mechanics. They try to upload, download, whatever you want to call it, so much into your brain to get you prepared for this.
Yeah, so first off, we can talk about the playbook. Multiple plays. I think it's 26 pro style plays offensively. We have to learn drops, how the routes are ran, yard depth, as well as we have to write a paper, explaining some things about why football, why we love it. So those are kind of some things we have to do before we get out there. And, it's all kind of being tested. Personality, how well we learn, coachability, on top of how well we throw the football. So it's all into one, personality, all that matters when you get out there.
Now, before you get out to that point, and you received that invitation, by the way, in the State College Regional, sharing the field with a couple other guys who ended up getting invitations, some SEC commits. It was a good field of quarterbacks. You stood out to the Elite 11 staff. But when we look at camps, before you get there, you're coming back here. You're getting a chance to work with Mike Yursich. I presumably get to see some commits on campus as well. What are you most excited about, maybe anxious about getting that ball and working directly with Mike Yursich as a committed player, as a part of his long-term plans now?
Yeah, really just learning from them on the field. We've talked off the field, how they do their offense, and now I really get to go out there. He gets to coach me up footwork, mechanics, all those type of things. So more on the field this time, because we can have the ball out on the field and throw it around. But previously, it's been more off the field film work.
How would you describe Mike Yursich as a recruiter, as a personal connection guy? Because we get a version of Mike Yursich in media interactions that I know is a lot different than what you're getting in your in your parents' house or out on the field. Can you kind of detail what you've learned these last 2 months about Mike Yursich, the man, about your potential coach, and why it works for you?
Yeah, he's super personable. You can talk to him about things outside of football. He's FaceTime me multiple times, what he's doing with his kids, whether it's baseball games, day at the lake. So, kind of building a relationship outside of football is going to be huge when getting on campus. If I want to go talk to him about something, I feel comfortable about it instead of just, talking X's and O's with him.
In recruiting, you go from being hunted to a hunter very quickly. I know you're in hunter mode now. You want to build out this class. You have championship aspirations. You need the help to get there. When you get to campus here in a couple weeks for your official visit, and you're going to be joined by a bunch of these commits, but there's also going to be some important targets there alongside you. What do you think about that opportunity, that 48-hour stretch where you are going to be on campus with some really important prospects?
Yeah, it's going to be huge. Really just trying to build the relationship with those guys. Relationships is huge to me. I feel like that's the best way to do it is, build a great relationship with them. And, hopefully we can, leave that weekend with, maybe a couple more commits, to add on to our class already. Just trying to make it one of the best classes in the country. Just kind of building a connection with those guys, showing them, why Penn State is the best place for them.
Any particular names that have, or particular names out there who have become familiar with you in a hurry because you've been blowing up their phone a little bit, or you've been trying to build that relationship? Any guys on that wish list, or maybe that relationship building, that you're trying to focus in on?
Yeah, there's quite a few guys. On Twitter, I do some quote tweets and some comments, and then even on Instagram, kind of messaging them back and forth. Um, if they post something, kind of uh, tweeting back, whatnot. Just a couple O linemen, couple wide receivers from that aspect. But yeah, just there's some targets that Coach Franklin has given me that just really trying to get those guys to see what Penn State's all about.
I know you'd like to fill out that wide receiver class. Some big names out there that you guys are targeting. Just looking ahead to your senior season, what are your primary objectives here to accomplish between now and the end of your high school career? And what kind of a quarterback are we going to see this autumn compared to maybe the junior passer that you were last year?
Yeah, really leadership. We want to. Their goal is to win a lot of games this year. Hopefully, a state championship. So we got a ton of guys returning, a lot of experience coming back, and just want to be the best leader I can be. Kind of showing them, how we should work in the summer and getting into the fall season. So leadership is going to be huge this year, and hoping for a really great season.
I remember speaking with Drew about the whole you're from Ohio. Eventually, he was Mr. Football in Ohio, but that Ohio State offer didn't materialize. Eventually, the Buckeyes tried to target him late, didn't work out for them. But Drew talked about leaving an area that is a lot of Buckeyes fans coming here to Penn State, where no one really likes Ohio State, and you're even closer. I mean, you're right in the neighborhood of Columbus. Drew wasn't. What has that been like for you? Because I imagine you have a lot of childhood friends, perhaps some family members who bleed Buckeyes red. How is that kind of changed some of those relationships for you since you put out this commitment?
Yeah, so my mom, played basketball at Ohio State, so we're super familiar with them. And as soon as I made the decision and told them, Penn State's the place for me, they turned into the biggest Penn State fans right away. So, um, really, just those connections were huge. And I'm going to go into State College being the biggest Penn State fan. So, not so much of going away from the Buckeyes, but just excited to join the Penn State family.
And you'll be back in the hometown pretty eventually in a Nittany Lions uniform, which I'm sure will be a pretty surreal feeling when you get to that point. Early enrollment, is that a plan for you? Are you going to be on campus in January?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And why was that a motivating factor for you to make sure that you could do that and finish up high school early?
Yeah, so really learning the playbook before the season starts, trying to get the most I can, get a whole spring ball under my belt, and then really changing my body once we get in there, get in the weight room, get the nutrition plan. So those were huge factors, and then obviously schoolwork, kind of getting ahead in college. I finished up most of my high school classes, so I think going into college with a couple extra credits before my first season is going to be huge.
Well, it's going to be here before you know it. We're 7 months away from you being a member of this Penn State football program. You mentioned physical development. I guess I'll finish there. Where are you right now, height and weight wise? A couple months shy of your senior season, and then what's your aspirations for where you'd like to be when you hit the practice field as a Penn State player?
Yeah, so I'm a little over 6'2" right now, about 6'2" and a quarter, 6'2" and a half, 190. My goal is to be about 195, 200 before the season starts, maybe even 205, and I'll play around there. And then after the season, try to really just shape my body the best I can before getting on campus. And those guys do a great job with the guys they've had, speed wise, strength wise. So just really trying to improve till then. And once I get on campus, they're going to do a great job.
Ethan Grunkemeyer, a new member of this Penn State class. We'll see how much it grows here in the month of June, but he's going to be on campus a couple times. Ethan, really appreciate the time. We look forward to getting to know you more in the months and years ahead.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care. We'll shift gears now and bring in a couple of Lions 24/7 colleagues in the form of Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan. Good to see both of these guys. Fellas, just had Ethan Grunkemeyer on. I know you both had a chance to speak with him at the State College Elite 11 Regional, and they've got a quarterback on board. We'll see if they potentially add a second down the road. But before we change pace, so what stood out, just circling back to that Elite 11 experience in your conversation with him, Daniel, about the quarterback that Penn State picked up in the month of May?
I think just looking at Ethan Grunkemeyer from the on-field perspective, the one thing that really stood out to me was his release and how he moved around on the field. He had a very, very quick release, seemed very confident with where he was going with the ball, and just moved very, very fluidly. You can see that, like he said, he wants to put on a little bit more weight before he gets here on campus, and you could see the room for growth there. But then talking to him after the Elite 11, I think that he sounded just like he did when you were just talking to him, Tyler, about pretty grounded, pretty down to earth, pretty direct, in answering the questions. Not necessarily the most long-winded talker, but someone who got to the point quickly and kind of has a really good understanding and awareness of where he is, what's around him, and what's ahead of him.
Yeah, and Mark, and you had a 2+ minute video reel of some of the highlights from Ethan that day. And again, not throwing against defenses, but a good opportunity to gauge some things out of the quarterback position. What stood out to you, Mark? We've got a few young quarterbacks that we're trying to assess on this current Nittany Lions roster. It's been Sean Clifford's show for so long, and here we've got another young one that's going to be following them to campus come January.
Yeah, just to build on what Daniel said, one of the cool things was I thought he was able to throw from some different arm slots.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mahomes is convinced all these quarterbacks to be able to whip it different ways.
Well, Ethan throws with Drew, and Drew can do that too.
Yeah. Well, that was my point. We saw it in the blue-white game, and I think these quarterbacks. I don't know what Ethan's baseball background is, but you can tell that they are watching the NFL and seeing what's working. You have to be really careful though, because the guys who can do that really well are at an elite level. But just what Daniel said, I mean, just a quick release. It's very difficult at those events because they're not necessarily going one-on-one. So you're not seeing that. But I'm sure the Penn State coaching staff has seen enough film of this kid, in actual games. They don't go and offer unless they have a good feel for it. But the other thing, to build on what Daniel said, you saw it there. It never ceases to amaze me. I think sometimes we forget these are like 16, 17-year-old kids. And I hate to say kids, but they are. And to talk to a goofball like me, or to come on the podcast and handle himself so well, I think that's important. I mean, I think that's a pretty cool thing to see out of these kids. And I think it's really, not to be too glowing about you, Tyler, but I think when you give these guys a little bit of a platform to come on and talk on a podcast like this, it's pretty cool to see how the vast majority of them carry themselves and do so well. And he was just the latest example of that.
And if you're James Franklin, if specifically a head coach, but an offensive coordinator as well, because you need the guy who's going to conduct things for you on the field, that matters. That presence, that ability to communicate and to do it without a bunch of bravado. And they got a nice run at quarterback, and from a personality standpoint, fortunately, we had Bo, Drew, and Jackson Smolik on this podcast multiple times before they enrolled. So the pressure's on Ethan to get back on before he gets to campus in January, and we'll get a chance to chat with him again. He'll be out at Elite 11 finals, as we said, in Southern California. We'll have a swarm of 24/7 sports recruiting analysts out there for the event. So stay tuned for that coming in mid-June. We'll have a chance to see him even sooner than that, though, on Sunday, Mark and Daniel, because it's the first prospect camp coming here to Happy Valley. We've got a bunch to look forward to, as always. We've got the 7-on-7 tournaments, big man challenges. The one on Sunday is going to be more positional work. Can you kind of give you did a great job, Mark, of kind of breaking down how these camps are a little different, what they mean to the program, with the piece you put up on the site a few days ago. Can you do that for our listeners a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just go through what a typical camp is like. I mean, the kids register at Beaver Stadium. It could be anywhere from a couple of hundred to, I think we've seen camps as big as 500 or 600 people. And this is for kids going into 9th grade to going into 12th grade. And sometimes we see a post-grad sneak in there, a JUCO guy, that not sneak in, but there's not a whole lot of those who may want to get in there to do some testing and whatnot. And, one of the coolest things about these camps, and if I would encourage anybody who has a kid who plays football, whatever their talent level, to go, because James Franklin addresses the parents as the kids are testing, as they're going through 40-yard dashes and jumps and all the other stuff they do. Franklin addresses the parents, and we've heard the speech quite a few times, and it changes a little bit year to year. They ask us not to put that out there because it's kind of a personal thing with him and the parents. But it's a good speech. I mean, it really is. It's something that I think a lot of parents need to hear. And one of the primary messages, and I'm not going to give away the whole thing, is that not everybody's kid is going to be playing at Penn State. If you have 600 kids at a camp, I mean, if 1 or 2 of those end up playing at Penn State or a similar college, it would be more than that. But playing at similar colleges. But it's a very difficult thing to do. But that doesn't mean that football can't be a really important part of their lives. So the guys go through all sorts of testing. And why is that important? They're measured because Penn State's able to build up this gigantic database, and you never know what you're going to find. Exhibit A last year, Ethan Black, a relatively local kid from Conemaugh Township, was just destroying it in the 40-yard dash. Not the most polished football receiver. And we were there. We saw them working with Ethan Black, 4 or 5 camps. And
he kept coming back. They kept asking him
back.
to come back. He kept coming back. And you'd see this blur with blonde hair during the 40-yard dash testing. And then they'd be trying to figure out what to do with him in a football the rest of the camp.
The point being, so now you fast forward and he's committed to Penn State. He's going to be enrolling whenever it is, the next semester in June, or later in June, I guess late June. And he's a 3-time state track champion at the recent PIAA, track and field sprints. So it was just it's unbelievable that you never know what you're going to find. I mean, I remember Jonathan Sutherland years and years ago just blew everybody away with a thing called a triple broad jump, which is basically 1 jump, 2 jump, 3 jumps all in a row. It's kind of like bunny hopping. And he was in 8th going into 9th grade, I think, or, after 8th grade and got out past 30 feet. And everybody's like, oh, my God. And, kid from Canada, and you're able to put yourself on the map. Not every kid's able to do that, but you have this huge database of, kids who, even if they may not end up being a scholarship guy, it's amazing how many of these kids we end up seeing coming to Penn State as preferred walk-ons. So then they
or
get in.
transfer portal entries. I mean,
Yeah,
that you got all this data and for all these
Yeah.
guys, and some of them are going to end up looking for a different college home, even if they don't pick you the first time. And it helps to have some foundational evidence of what they're capable of doing physically.
Yeah, so I know I'm going on and on about this, but I just wanted to give people a feel for it because we're going to be at a lot of these things over the next few weeks. But then they do positional work with the Penn State coaches. There'll be Penn State players who are able to work with them. I think the players can actually get paid a little bit now, and coaches from other teams. We've seen Temple here, we've seen smaller schools here. That all these people come up and work with all these kids, and then at the end they do one-on-one work, and it's you can see the guys who really kind of rise to the top. There got people who, you're watching this and it doesn't take an expert to see who some of the better players are. And I'll never forget Micah Parsons. He was so good. And I think it was with Clifford. Maybe it wasn't with Clifford, but at one point, Micah Parsons shows up at camp and is drilling as a tight end, just on a lark, and they matched him up with the best defensive back. And I forget what the kid's name. He wasn't an elite, but Micah had no idea what the hell he was doing, and he was burning the guy deep on every single thing. So those are the kind of things you see. And then the other cool part is that Franklin wraps it up. And again, I'm not going to give it away, but he has a really good speech for these young players. And it just, touches on a lot of the things that, hey, not everybody's going to be the elite player, but football can take you a long way in life. Use common sense on social media, lessons that I was able to pass along to my daughter, just because a lot of it's just common sense. So they're really fun to cover. It's a lot of work. They're long days, but it's a cool atmosphere to kind of be around. So I know that was a lot, but we're going to be investing a lot of time in these. Again, it sucked when we couldn't cover these things during COVID, and
Sure
it was completely understandable. I'm not saying that being critical to anybody. It was completely understandable because they were erring on the side of caution. But to be able to go back and do those things again last year was really cool. And I'll save the 7-on-7 recap for when that comes up in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and we had a blast last summer, and we were just starting to get our new team together at Lions 24/7. Daniel had just come on board, Tyler Calvaruso had just come on board, and now I think we have a really good strategy in place for how we're going to attack these.
Doan shows up.
Brian Doan rolls in, so
flexes
we got a lot
muscles.
cooking. Yeah, a lot cooking on the camp circuit here in the month, and by the way, I'm reminded just how it goes all the way from a guy who's in junior college to a guy who's barely in high school at these camps, and how they can impact the staff's sense for what they're going to do on any given recruiting board. Jair Brown came here after 1 year at the junior college level and was barely a blip on the radar for anyone at the FBS level, even for us who were following the camp roster. He ends up coming away with an offer. He ends up committing pretty quickly, and he ends up becoming an all Big Ten safety here. That's one that happens so quickly. And then you've got someone like Landon Tengwall, who was kind of there was a bunch of talk about him after he showed up before his freshman season at the high school level. And of course, by the time he got to his freshman season, Maryland had already offered him down there. And lo and behold, he ends up becoming the first offensive lineman offered by the Nittany Lions in that cycle. He ends up being a big time commitment for them. So some of these guys we hear about on the camp circuit back when they're 14, 15 years old, some of them maybe get a chance after high school to impress the staff. And it's just the floodgates are open a little bit. Anybody can show up to campus and enroll. Put your best foot forward and try to wow the staff. It's not always going to be the guys who have the 24/7 sports profiles already in place when they get here to campus. And Daniel, as we talk about the schedule for June, the schedule for September and beyond has been very much coming to light here in the last couple of weeks as we got kickoff times announced. We spent a lot of time last week on the podcast breaking down the Michigan State matchup coming our way on Black Friday. And then, of course, the whiteout matchup, West Virginia coming to town to open the season on September 2nd. Now we've got a few more known entities on this schedule. What do you make of it, Daniel? You had the story up as things broke on Wednesday. 4 games, kickoff times, and TV broadcast plans have been revealed.
Yeah, I think the place to start is Penn State has that. I don't know how coveted it is for the fans, but that big noon Saturday slot on Fox that over the past couple of years has emerged as something that has a lot of eyeballs on that. Penn State will have that at Illinois on September 16th for their Big Ten opener. And then later in November at home against Michigan November 11th. That one was previously reported by Action Network. So this will be the second year in a row that Penn State has at least two of those big noon Saturday kicks. Last year it was at Michigan and at home against Ohio State. UMass Homecoming, the Generations of Greatness game, that got the 3:30 p.m. time slot on October 14th, which should make for that time of year for homecoming. That should be a good day for tailgating. I don't know what that football game is going to be like, but the experience around it should be pretty good. And then finally, September 9th, Delaware gets a noon kick, and that will be televised on Peacock. So it won't be on, your linear TV or your cable package. You'll have to stream that one. And this is kind of the new era, I guess, of Big Ten football with this new TV deal and kind of, taking this next step. So, the schedule has come together. There was a little tweak with the whiteout against Iowa that got moved from an 8 p.m. Kick to a 7:30 p.m. kick. For those night games, I'll take any extra time I can get any earlier. But yeah, I mean, the schedule has come together. I feel like I don't remember there being this many kick times and network designations being made this early. I think right now there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games remaining on the schedule that need a time and TV network. So you can kind of start to piece together your fall schedule. You can figure out what your best deal is to get Peacock. And then you can kind of go from there with planning out your fall.
I was going to say 75% of the stories, comments at least on your story about these schedule changes were about Peacock versus any of the opponents that Penn State will be playing. And that's the new age for college football and a new age for the Big Ten. We got games on Peacock this season. We've got another game on CBS, which had been a supreme rarity for a long time now, back-to-back years. And then, of course, multiple games in prime time on NBC. We're still waiting for Ohio State. That's one of those matchups that we don't yet know what the kickoff time will be or the network that will be carrying it. We're going to circle back to this subject a little bit later in the mailbag, but Mark, I wanted to make sure we gave a spotlight to the trip that you and your daughter Grace, who's a photographer here at Lions 24/7, made to Hershey yesterday to the Penn State Health Children's Hospital. This was a fantastic annual tradition for Penn State football. Unfortunately, it was on pause for a few years, resumed in a big way on Wednesday. You got a firsthand look. We have video, photos, coverage, a bunch at lions247.com. But for our listeners, can you take us inside that experience?
Yeah, it was the first time I was able to do it. In the past, we've had Harvey Levine, our photographer, who lives down there relatively close, go and handle that. But he was unavailable this week. So Grace and I decided to go down, and it was unbelievable. I mean, it's like, it's so cliche to talk about perspective, but this really does lend perspective. And to hear the players afterward talk about seeing what these kids are going through and really having an understanding of it, or to have a guy like Adisa Isaac, who's had 3 siblings who have had serious medical challenges in their lives and has spent a large portion of his life in hospitals, with his family. It really kind of hits home. And it always, Tyler, you'll appreciate this, and Daniel, you'll appreciate it someday. But, thank God we have these people who take care of kids. It's unbelievable. So as neat as it is to see the kids having fun, it's also pretty cool to see the doctors and nurses who are the heroes, who are taking care of these kids, be a part of the whole thing, and for everybody to be giving them shout outs. But what they're able to do is in the hospital, there's a cafe area, kind of a sprawling cafeteria kind of area. And for all the kids who are well enough to go down there and play bag toss or Jenga, which was hilarious. Tyrese Mills was like the most competitive. He and a little kid were playing Jenga, and it was hilarious. I mean, the kid was competitive. He was competitive, but also coloring. You see these big mega Barnwell sitting there with a little girl coloring. All those things were kind of open for the cameras and the reporters to see. But behind the scenes, for the kids who aren't doing quite so well or having specific struggles that they can't come out of the rooms, a bunch of players went up to the different floors and were able to visit them in person. And that's where, Caden Wallace said, wow, you really have an appreciation when you see what these little kids are going through. So just an absolute great event. It's great that Penn State's able to get back and do it again. And again, a shout out to these kids who are going through so much, and a gigantic shout out to the doctors and nurses. I am telling you, these people are heroes. I don't know how they do what they do, because they have to deal with difficult, heartbreaking situations every day. But thank God we have them. And it's cool to see Penn State football go down and support that kind of effort.
Amen. Yeah, I had not been to this specific hospital, but I spent some time camped out. I think you remember, Mark, with my godson at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia back in, I think it was 2017. And I know James Franklin had to spend some time there, early on, and it's just yeah, it's hard to even talk about football after we have this conversation. It hits home. So let's try to pivot here and bring up the fact that 24/7 Sports dropped a new transfer portal rankings, top 24/7. It's the final edition. It's the first and final edition of these top 24/7. A lot of work done on the 24/7 Sports staff to narrow things down here. You got thousands of players now entering the transfer portal on an annual basis. It's some recklessly, and some makes a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, these are viewed to be the best of the best. And Penn State placed 2 in the top 24/7. Number 36 overall is Kent State transfer Dante Cephas, who joined the program in May. And then you've got number 243 overall, Malik McLean out of Florida State, who joined the program in January. Both of them working at wide receiver. Cephas will make his debut on the practice field in August. McLean had a chance to get those reps in during the spring ball. And guys, I mean, it just kind of goes into hammering home the point that Penn State clearly needed to prioritize the wide receiver position. There were 53 of them overall ranked inside the top 24/7. It was a position that there was a lot of talent available out there. Penn State got 2 that are viewed as potential starting caliber by our 24/7 Sports group of analysts. And Daniel, I'm curious what you make of the necessity for the Nittany Lions to get big seasons out of both of these guys, because I feel like we've spent so much time talking about Dante Cephas. Malik McLean didn't come here to play, third fiddle at a position. I think this is a guy that we need to keep tabs on, and he faces a very important summer because those young bucks are also making their move.
Definitely. I think Malik McLean is someone who, even though he was on campus in January and got to go through spring practice, kind of operated in Dante Cephas's shadow a little bit, because Cephas is so much more of a known commodity at the MAC level coming out of Kent State. I mean, we all saw those numbers that Cephas put up. I believe it was 2 years ago. Was his big year with the Golden Flashes, and to think about what that can bring to an offense with Drew Aller at quarterback. With what Penn State needs after losing Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington after last year, what they can supplement around Keandre Lambert-Smith, if he can continue how he closed last year. I think that Cephas was someone, where, because he had the track record, there was a lot of excitement around him. Malik McLean was a little bit quieter in his first 2 years at Florida State. Was still a well-regarded recruit, came out of IMG Academy. So that he was prepared for what college was going to bring. And, I'd say that he had a bit of a quiet spring. I think that he was someone where whenever, you'd watch the wide receivers go through drills in practice, you'd post some videos, and every single time someone would say, oh, who's number 11? 6'4", around 200 pounds, a little bit over. That's something that isn't really on the roster. It's not really something that Penn State has had at the wide receiver position in a while. He and Malik Mega are similarly built, but Penn State is going to need some production out of Malik McLean. I think that he is someone who can really raise the floor of that wide receiver room. When you bring a transfer in, who's going to be a third-year guy, I think the expectation is that he can pick things up pretty quickly and be more physically ready. So I think that this summer is going to be really big for Malik McLean to put himself in that position, come August, where he can compete for one of those, maybe not necessarily a starting job, but to be in that top 6, to be in that 2 deep, to be someone who can rotate in, maybe beyond just being a tap guy. What we saw last year early on in the year, that's pretty much what it was. It was 3 guys. And then, tap and someone would come in. So I think that Malik McLean has the potential to lengthen the depth chart at wide receiver a little bit. And that's not just referring to his size. So we'll see what he can do. But yeah, I think that he's someone that when practice really kicks off in August, there's going to be a lot of eyes on him to see what he can do, how he can develop, and if he can really work his way into that rotation to be a viable target for Drew Aller.
25 games at Florida State in 2 seasons there, 33 catches, 396 yards, 5 touchdowns. Much more robust of a stat sheet for Dante Cephas at the group of 5 level with Kent State, listed 6 foot, 180 pounds in his debut on the Penn State roster. Last couple seasons with Kent State, Cephas goes 130 catches, 1,984 yards, 12 touchdowns in 23 games. He missed a stretch of games last season. 2-time All-MAC. First team selection, and you look at his production, 9 100-yard performances the last couple of years at Kent State. Last season against the common opponent with Penn State, actually, the Ohio Bobcats, 13 catches, 246 yards. Different level of football for Dante Cephas, but major expectations for a wide receiver room that plenty of unknown factors there and guys who were much more heavily recruited than Dante Cephas by Power 5 programs. So it's going to be interesting how it all matches up when you've got a guy like Cephas toward the back end of his career, didn't get the love coming out of high school, and then you've got this collection of young talent that had a lot of Power 5 offers on the table. They end up at Penn State. Ultimately, it's Marcus Hagan's job now to figure out what he's got in this group. Carmelo Taylor, the last remaining piece, as far as we understand, to join from a scholarship perspective. One of those June enrollees, the speedy freshman coming up from Virginia. You mentioned Ethan Black. I was going to get to him here on the podcast, so we got that crossed off our list. Thanks for doing that during the camp segment. It's time for our mailbag then. And we've got a couple here on the show. If you missed it over at Lions247.com for our VIP subscribers, we've got a thread posted. It is acting as our Lions 24/7 podcast mailbag. A lot of questions already thrown in there. We hit on one for the recruiting realm with Tyler Calvaruso on our last episode. This time we've got a couple, and we'll begin with a roster question here for the 2023 Nittany Lions. And I'm going to throw it to my friends Daniel and Mark now. What is the level of concern regarding the defensive tackle group? Even before Michigan and Ohio State matchups, Illinois and Iowa seem like teams that will attack that potential weakness directly. Who do they view as legit 2-deep guys at that position, and who can really fill that PJ Mustipher role? Mark, we'll start with you here.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've gone over this before, that I don't think they have a apples for apples comparison guy to PJ Mustipher. I don't think they have that 330 pounder, unless I'm missing somebody. They have some bigger guys, but not quite that size. I think getting Izzard back healthy is going to be really key. But I think it may be more than a 2-deep. I think they could be rolling 5-6 guys at those positions. I mean, I think we know what Zane Durant and Hakeem Beamon are all about. Maybe not the biggest guys, although seeing both of those guys yesterday, every time you see them, they're getting a little bit bigger. So I wouldn't sleep on either of those guys. I don't think we're going to get Hakeem to tell us his actual weight at any point. But I think both of those guys are getting bigger. And, Townley, just physically impressive. You see this guy, and I think it was good that they were able to get him back. And I think now that he's focused on playing D tackle, that will be a positive. And then the other guy, Caleb Artis. He's a big, and you could tell he just looks like a big, strong guy. So I know I'm throwing a lot of names out there, but I don't know that you're going to have 3-4 guys. I think they're going to be in a pretty good position where they're able to roll some guys through. Alonzo Ford, the transfer, looks good physically. I think he can get a little more kind of ripped. Like when you look at Zane Durant and Hakeem Beamon, like these guys, you can tell they've been in an elite weight program. And I don't want to come across being negative about Ford, but looking at him, I think these next couple months in the Penn State weight program are going to be helpful for him. I didn't have a chance to talk to him, but I would bet you he would say the same thing. But I think there are enough people there that they're going to be fine. And I left out Jordan Vandenberg. I mean, he's a guy who's played good minutes for them the last couple years. So I don't know that it's 2-4 guys. I think it's going to be 5-6 that they're able to rotate through there. And I think that's kind of a luxury. So I don't think you're going to have that one guy who kind of projects as, potentially first team all Big Ten, which I think PJ would have done had he been completely healthy. I think it's going to be more kind of a D tackle by committee.
That's the question here, and I think people are not just looking physically for a matchup to fill PJ's shoes. They're looking for someone to fill up his snap monster pedigree for Penn State. I mean, he's a guy who barely left the field coming off of that injury last year, led the entire defensive tackle group with more than 460 snaps. Now, you didn't lose really anyone else from that rotation that's going to leave a major chunk in those snaps, but there's 460 snaps to fill all of a sudden. And I think the question is someone step up and go 400 plus snaps this year for the first time in their career, or do we see a couple guys go 250 plus over the course of this game?
I think your two best tackles right now, and I left out Devon Elise because he's a guy who could well start for them, and he's probably the closest thing they have to PJ. I'm sorry because there's so many numbers here, but I don't think you could expect a Akeem Beamon or a Zane Durant to be a 400 snap guy. I think these are super high energy guys that I don't want to pigeonhole them, but they're lighter, and I don't think you need 400 snaps. That's what I think you can keep guys fresh by rotating it in there. And I shouldn't have left out Devon because I think whatever mix is there, Izzard and Devon and Beeman and Durant are going to be the four key guys, and I think you build off of that.
The two deep that we had on our unofficial 24/7 Sports depth chart coming out of spring ball was Devon Ailes, Keziah Izzard, Hakeem Beamon, and Zane Durant. Those were the four we had up top. And the name that I'll go back to here, and by the way, Keziah did not participate in spring practice based on everything we saw. He was an observer. He was working his way back from bumps and bruises, as James Franklin refers to them as. So some ground to make up there. We'll track his progress coming into the summer. But the name that you mentioned it, but I want to just kind of double down on it and maybe triple down on it going into the summer. Jordan Vandenberg, the man they call JJ. There is a sense, I think, that he has really found his footing at the Power 5 level. Remember, he had such a unique journey to get to this campus. He's a guy who, an international prospect, focused on a different sport, ends up getting an opportunity to play at the JUCO level. It's, during the pandemic situation. So, and it's an abbreviated experience. It's an abbreviated season. He's got a quarterback on his roster who Penn State's looking at. They both travel to campus. He blows the staff away with the testing numbers he produces. He gets an offer. And then he's on the team before anybody gets a chance to really interview him in 2021. I think by the time we got to the Outback Bowl, when the defense was decimated, you started to see some flashes of him. And then last year as a rotational piece, 170 plus snaps along the way. And I'm really curious to see what he can do in his third year with the program here. I think as we tend to list these names, he's one of those that I maybe we're not putting enough light on. And I say that because a lot of these guys were four-star prospects, Devon Ailes, Keziah Izzard. You work your way down this list, Akeem Beamon, Zane Durant. These were known Power 5 prospects going back to about halfway through their high school career. Penn State happened to sign them. Penn State got an absolute gem here. It's a guy who's still figuring out his path in football. They love what he is as a physical and athletic specimen. I think he has really fit the culture well to a T. And so he's the guy that I'm circling, not as someone who's going to go out there and become some kind of all Big Ten dominating snaps, but if we're looking at how do those pieces kind of step up as if you don't have a 450 snap guy and you have a couple other guys that you're sprinkling in those snaps, he's someone that I'm kind of putting in that let's wait and see, because there is a lot of good feedback, I think, about where Jordan Vandenberg is with the program here in 2023. And based on what he's done and what the box score has looked like, I think maybe we're looking past it just a little bit. Daniel, what do you think about this thought?
Yeah, definitely. I went through and I jotted things down before we came on, and I came out with Elise, Beeman, Izzard, and Durant as kind of that top four. I think Vandenberg has the opportunity to work his way, really into that rotation. But I think you have a couple of wild cards with this group, and that depends on, it really depends on these players' development this summer and what they can do. I think that Alonzo Ford comes in with a lot of experience. And what does he look like after a summer in the weight program? Davon Townley, what does he look like after another, summer working exclusively at defensive tackle? I think the physical strides that he made, just in coming back from the portal and moving, by the time we got to the blue-white game, he looked like he could become a defensive tackle. You could start to see, the physical outline for that, for him there. And then, when you talk about an apples to apples replacement for PJ Mustipher, not necessarily from a snap standpoint, but from that size. Caleb Artis, is 315 pounds. He's the biggest guy. I believe he's still the biggest guy that they have at the position on the roster. What is he able to do, going into his redshirt freshman year? I think that with the top four that we covered, and then maybe to a lesser extent with Vandenberg, you kind of know what you have if you're Penn State. If you're Deion Barnes, if you're Manny Diaz, you've seen these guys have put up a lot of tape over the past 2 years. We've really seen what they've been able to do. So you kind of have an outline of what you're going to be working with at that depth chart. But I think a guy like Artis or Ford or Townley, they can really change your equation a little bit depending on the work that they do this summer and how it comes together. So, I think that'll be really interesting. And, to go back to what our, the question asker wanted to know about Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan, looming on the schedule, some of the more, kind of ground and pound teams in the Big Ten. I think that when you talk about, stopping them, I think it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think it's, for those games specifically, it's going to have to be a total team effort on the defensive side of the ball. The linebackers are going to have to be in the right spot every single time. Those defensive tackles on the interior are going to have to be taking up their blockers. They're going to have to be doing the right thing at the right time to maybe prevent what we saw against Michigan last year. Maybe Manny Diaz has, something up his sleeve in terms of, scheme or approach or something like that. But I think that physically, this kind of is what it is right now. They're not going to get a ton bigger between now and September, no matter what James Franklin says about wanting to get bigger. So, I think that in putting this together, I think that, you're just really going to have to rely on team defense for those games. But I do think there are a couple guys in that defensive tackle room right now who could really, depending on how the summer goes, they can make things look a little bit different come September than what we're thinking about right now in June.
Two things just to finish off this topic. Alonzo Ford played in 25 games at Old Dominion. He started all 25 of those games. Mark, you made a great point because Arnold Ebiketie vibes here a little bit in terms of a guy who was like a 2-star prospect coming out of high school, ends up at the FBS level, then comes to Penn State. The difference here is we heard so much about Ebiketie making the most of that January to July stretch before they got on the field for preseason camp. It is a truncated version of that. He's going to have to hit the ground running here, Alonzo Ford, between now and when they get to the field in August. I think that maybe impacts some of the reasonable expectations you have for early action. We'll see. Maybe you could exceed those expectations. But and then the other thing here, I think when you look at that those matchups that everyone's kind of afraid about because of what we've seen in the past, Illinois in 2021, Michigan last year, I think the linebacker position's in a much different spot when you look at how you're going to defend against those teams than it was on the road against Michigan last year. If I recall correctly, you had Curtis Jacobs playing at the will position still. You had Jonathan Sutherland still playing a lot at the Sam. You had the two Mike linebackers working in there who had a month of experience as being primary guys in a defense. Back in 2021, that linebacker unit wasn't even where you're going to see it. It wasn't close to where you're going to see it in 2023. So I think when you start to talk about the depth at linebacker, the more accountability there, the star power there, maybe that can maybe button some things up for you in some of those matchups. I think that's you can't pin it all to. I know James Franklin put it out there, and he put a lot on the defensive tackle's shoulders when he came out of that game in Ann Arbor and said, "Our defensive tackles are too small. What in the world?" And I think he spent some significant time since then kind of backtracking on those comments. Whenever he's asked about it, he always says we're not going to sacrifice athleticism for the sake of size. So not quite sure what to make of it. They just brought in one freshman defensive tackle, Ty Blanding, who's about 270 pounds right now. He was probably 260 pounds when they signed him in December. So he's probably not going to push any further than about 280, 285 based on our conversations and where he's going to be settling at the college football level. One more question to get to in the mailbag. We'll finish with this one. It goes back to the scheduling developments for Penn State here in 2023. Does getting more games this season in a national spotlight add to the pitch this staff can give recruits and actually have meaning, or do they have to win these nationally televised primetime games for it to really matter? Mark, you've covered a lot of Penn State seasons. I know the whole TV structure, streaming structure has changed tremendously over the years, but there are going to be a lot of eyeballs on this Penn State team, bookended by NBC primetime matchups to start the season against West Virginia, to close the season against Michigan State. You've got that whiteout game on CBS in primetime in late September against Iowa. Now you've got two Big Ten noon kickoffs or big noon kickoffs, whatever they call it at Fox. And then we've got the Ohio State game still to figure out. And there's going to be plenty of people watching that. I mean, this is prime time season, it feels like.
I know, but I think what's skewing this a little bit is all the different networks involved. Because if you go back to 2021, 10 games were on ABC, Fox, or FS1. And what did that team do? I mean, it started really well and then lost 7 of 9 or 5 of whatever the heck it was, and just crashed and burned. And then what did it do? It signed arguably its most impactful freshman class since like 1991. So to address that, I think getting on TV is a great thing. But I think what we've learned is that no matter what with Penn State, it's going to get national TV coverage. It just does. And why? Because it generates great ratings. And now that CBS, our company, and NBC can get a piece of that Penn State pie, they're diving in and trying to scoop up and get as much as they possibly can. But with respect to how it's going to impact recruiting, I think we've seen in the past that whether you play well on TV or whether you don't play well on TV, I think like a whiteout game where you have a ton of recruits, that in particular could be helpful if you play really well. But even if not, I mean, again, I go back to 2021 when the season started off great, but by I think every account was a disappointment at the end. They still follow that up by bringing in not only a highly ranked class, but a class that was even more impactful than most of us, I expected. So I think the difference is it's a little deceiving that these games are spread across multiple networks now, different ones where we haven't seen much of Penn State recently. And I think that's kind of giving it a little bit of a different look. But they've always, I mean, that was one thing that I thought Bill O'Brien was super smart about when the sanctions were coming down against Penn State. The one thing he said that they needed to fight for was to be able to keep having games on TV. Take away the bowls, do whatever you want to do, but let Penn State still be on TV. And even in those years, they were still on TV in an inordinate amount of time on major networks for a program going through what it was going through. So Penn State's always had that star appeal. It's just being spread across different networks now.
Yeah, there's certain schools out there, there's plenty of them in the Big Ten, that they get maybe 2 moments in the spotlight a season because of who they're playing. Other teams get the spotlight because they're playing Penn State. Michigan State's coming off a losing season. West Virginia's coming off a losing season. People aren't scrambling around to see them on TV this year. They're playing Penn State. That's why they're in these kind of matchups this year. That's why the conference views them as valuable to put Penn State in the spotlight like this. But I think what maybe is a little undersold, because you've got the 3 hours where the game's on, but guess what NBC is going to be doing all week? No matter what you're watching on TV, no matter what time of the day you're watching, they're going to be gearing up Labor Day week for that big September 2nd matchup between West Virginia. Watch the young up-and-coming quarterback and these top 10 Nittany Lions take on the Mountaineers. You're going to hear it. You're going to see it. It's going to be in your living room, regardless of where you are in the country, because NBC is on a lot of TVs. No matter how much you're paying for streaming services or whatnot, you got NBC probably. Same goes for CBS. When they've got, when you've got them on your home turf for the first time this century, it's a pretty big deal. And so I think that's going to be something that pays off. The noon kickoff has clearly generated enough where Fox is going all in on it. And what you've got in these cases are, you've got the pregame setups. I know they're going to have that out in Illinois for the noon kickoff. They're going to have it here in Happy Valley for one of those noon kickoffs as well. So you've got everybody sitting around, maybe getting their grill going, maybe getting some of their drinks going, getting ready for noon kickoff, depending on what channel they're watching. But if they're watching pregame on the network that Penn State's playing on, and you got one on CBS, you got a couple on NBC, they're going to be interviewing Penn State players. They're going to be doing Penn State profiles. And I think in the NIL era, you can't shortchange anything like that, where you've got that kind of eyeballs, this kind of viewership on Penn State players, on James Franklin, the face of the franchise here. So, yeah, I think it is something you can tangibly sell to recruits. At the end of the day, they want to see you win these matchups. But I think it's just important that regardless, year in, year out, you're not going to get overlooked at Penn State. It's impossible to be overlooked. There's a lot of schools you can go to, even here in the Big Ten, and be a really impressive player. My alma mater Daniel's alma mater. They've had some really good players in the past 5 years or so. You probably didn't notice them. If you show up and you ball out in the Nittany Lions uniform, you're going to get it done. You're going to be a national name. Daniel, we'll give you the final word on this one. I know we're all just excited to have a lot of buzz around each of these matchups because generally speaking, it feels like this is the year of buzz for Penn State football, certainly more so than any I've experienced since 2017 on this beat.
Yeah, I didn't want to take an unnecessary shot at Tyler's alma mater, but he brought the alma mater up. But you look at in the TV announcements yesterday. I mean, Rutgers is playing Northwestern at noon on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend, and that to me that Sunday has always felt kind of like the most complete dead zone because it's the middle of the 3-day weekend. There's just not a lot of juice, to be a program that kind of has to do that. We've seen it with some of the schools that, which schools in the Big Ten have been able to really put their foot down about the Friday night games and which ones have been the ones to really bear the brunt of that. I think that shows that Penn State is in a very good spot when it comes to its standing in the conference and, where it can be put on television to gain exposure. But, from the recruiting perspective, I think any bit of exposure helps. Penn State isn't going to say we're good. Like, you don't need to put us on prime time this week. We think we have enough, of a platform out there. You're going to take everything that you can get, and you never know, which, maybe 9th grader, 8th grader, 7th grader, in California, Texas, happens to be tuning in to a whiteout that night, and that is their first glimpse of what Penn State looks like. But I think Mark laid it out very well as to how that 2021 season went, and then what that yielded on the recruiting trail. A lot of that class was in place before the season started, and there was not a ton of movement ahead of signing day. And I think that speaks to that, recruiting in the end, comes back to the staff, comes back to the relationships, and really comes back to the infrastructure that is really around, a program. Winning obviously helps, but there's a whole bunch of other factors that are there. That being said, doesn't hurt for Penn State to be in these primetime games on the recruiting trail, and definitely wouldn't hurt to win the games because I think that all builds towards the ultimate thing that can help you recruit even better, which is the opportunity to come to a place like Penn State to be in the college football playoff, to play for a national championship. So, everything's connected, but I don't think it's something that, you to really devote, a lot of brain power, a lot of really thought to. And I thought Mark did a really good job of laying that out for us.
All right, well, there you have it. Our take on Penn State's schedule thus far, and a lot more here on this episode. Mark, Brennan, Daniel Gallen, you catch their work at lions247.com. Appreciate you guys coming on the podcast.
Thanks,
Tyler.
All right, good stuff from my colleagues at Lions247. As always, thanks again to Ethan Grunkemeyer, the Penn State quarterback commit, for hopping on this episode of the podcast with us. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donohue. We've got some camp to cover this weekend, so follow our coverage at lions247.com. Thanks, as always, for tuning in to the Lions247 podcast.